Want an easy way to find these on the California coast? Stick around, I'll show you how.
Welcome back to another video, guys, on Lost Coast Living. I'm Frankie, and today we're going to talk about something pretty exciting and pretty close to my heart: the identification and care for chanterelle mushrooms. Have you ever walked through the woods and looked at the flora around you and wondered what kinds of culinary dishes you could make? Well, today we're diving into the world of identification of chanterelles and some culinary recipes that you can try at home. But first, let's talk about why chanterelles are so amazing. Did you know that chanterelles have been cherished for thousands of years? Thought to be originating in Europe, but slowly made their way over to the United States, making their way into mushroom lovers' baskets all over. These beauties are known as gold of the woods, and I'm here to tell you that they are worth their weight in gold, both in flavor and market value. And let's not forget about that unique smell and taste of the chanterelle mushroom. If you were to pick a chanterelle and you were to smell it, it would smell slightly of apricots. It also has a pleasant peppery flavor to it, so adding it to any sort of dish that you could usually put those small button cremini mushrooms on is going to elevate that dish and make it that much better. Plus, you've harvested it yourself. It's sort of like growing a garden, you know? Those tomatoes seem that much sweeter when you do all that work yourself. Once you smell and taste chanterelle mushrooms, it's something I guarantee that you'll never forget. So keep it right here on Lost Coast Living, and let's get started.
I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. Try to catch me howling at the moon. Try to catch me howling at the
moon. All right, for this section, let's talk about the Forager's Field Guide. Let's get into identifying these amazing golden mushrooms. First off, listen up. Misidentifying mushrooms can be very dangerous. It can cause you bad gastrointestinal distress, if not be completely lethal. So you have to really pay attention when you're going out into the woods. I recommend you go with somebody more experienced than you at first. Keep doing that until you are 100% sure in your capability of identifying and consuming mushrooms. Here's a couple of good examples of Jack O'Lanterns next to chanterelles. A couple key differences between Jack O'Lantern and chanterelles. First, let's start with Jack O'Lanterns. Jack O'Lanterns are known to grow in large groups or clusters. And on the other hand, chanterelles are known to grow in small clusters, like 1 to 4 mushrooms. Once they start to grow into clusters about 5 mushrooms, I really want to take a second look at the mushrooms. Take a look at the color, take a look at the gills, and other identifying factors of the chanterelle mushroom before you proceed. Along with growing in groups, jack-o'-lanterns also have true sharp gills. And on the other hand, chanterelles have false gills or primitive gills. These gills look a lot like veins that fork off near the end. These gills also extend down the stalk of the chanterelle. I mentioned looking at color. The color of the jack-o'-lantern is much darker usually than the chanterelle mushroom. When you're walking through the woods and you spot a chanterelle mushroom, it might look something like a perfectly toasted marshmallow, when the jack-o'-lantern has much more of an orange, darker color, a lot like a pumpkin. A cool fun fact about the jack-o'-lantern, the inedible mushroom, is that the gills and spores are bioluminescent, so they actually glow at night. I wouldn't really use this as an identifying factor unless you want to stick around till pretty late at night to look at the gills. But you shouldn't have to wait for the bioluminescence to realize that that mushroom that you're looking at is a jack-o'-lantern. Because why? It's growing in a large group or cluster. Like big group or cluster. It has true gills. The gills on the jack-o'-lantern don't extend all the way down the stalk of the jack-o'-lantern itself. And usually jack-o'-lanterns like to grow in wood. Next, let's take a smell. Go ahead and pick what you believe to be a chanterelle mushroom. Turn it over and give it a smell. If it smells likely of apricots, more than likely you're on the right track. So you've looked at the gills. They're primitive or false gills. You've smelled the mushroom itself. It smells lightly of apricots. You've looked at the shape of the mushroom itself. It looks sort of like a funnel or a trumpet, but it's not hollow in the middle like other mushrooms can be. For instance, the winter chanterelle. You've taken the mushroom and you've peeled it. It peels much like string cheese. These are all good signs that you're on your way to picking a good chanterelle. Now that you have the basics of identifying a chanterelle down, let's move on to seasonality. What are the best seasons and times to pick chanterelles? For this section, we're going to talk about seasons. So around my area in Northern California, it's October now and we're starting to see a lot of chanterelles pop up. Right now, they're still sort of young. There are some mature chanterelles popping up, but they're far and few between, at least so far with my experience. Now this depends on the year. If it's been a particularly hot summer, the chanterelles might take a little longer to pop up. Usually the chanterelles like to pop up after a good rain. Once that good rain hits, September, October, and November, you'll want to wait a couple days after that rain. If you go too soon, you might get a chance of picking a soggy chanterelle, and nobody likes a soggy mushroom. Once you get into December and January, this is usually where I see chanterelles start to trail off, but again, this is really dependent on how that year feels. Chanterelles like it cold, but not too cold. I'm going to tell you a couple of tips that I know, usually a surefire way to gather chanterelles. The things I'm looking for. Chanterelles love oak wood. They also love Doug fir, conifers, deciduous trees. I find them a lot around oaks. So this is what I'll do. I'll go into the woods. I'll give myself a checklist and write these down if you feel compelled. 1. Am I on a south-facing slope? Usually the south-facing slopes are where I find the most chanterelles. 2. Is there moss cover on the ground around me? Is there a lot of moss? 3. Am I around oaks or conifers? Doug fir, hemlock, especially in my area in Northern California. Am I on a slope with well-drained soil? Chanterelles like well-draining soil. They don't like soaked or saturated soil. So if you're on a south-facing slope where that rain could easily run down the hill and not sit in one area, that's a good indicator that chanterelles might be there. And remember, the beginning of winter is when the chanterelles like to come out and play. Now, we're going to talk about the code of the woods. Let's talk about foraging responsibly and the code of the woods. We'll also go over the leave no trace idea. When you're foraging and you do find your first patch of chanterelles, I know it's really exciting and you want to go through and pick every mushroom you see. But please, mushrooms do play an important part in the ecology around you. They have a symbiotic relationship with the trees you see around them. The mushrooms will give the nutrients to the trees that the trees need, and in return, the trees will give the mushrooms sugars that the trees create with photosynthesis, something mushrooms can't do. Long story short, leave some for the next hunter that's going to come in a couple weeks, and leave some for the woods and the natural ecosystem around you. The woods will thank you, and I'll thank you. Next, let's get into the legal stuff. Let's talk about permits and private property. Obviously, you're not going to just drive down the road, see a good patch of woods, and say, hey, let's go mushroom hunting there. Well, you might, but you might run into some trouble. You might be wandering onto somebody's private property, and they will more than likely not appreciate it. Also, you might be hunting in an area that requires a permit. Around my area, we have Jackson Demonstration State Forest, and we do need a permit to harvest here. It's like $20 to $25 a year. I can't remember the exact date, but if you're interested in looking into that permit, I'll have a link in the description for you to look at. Finally, let's talk about the leave no trace. Pack out what you pack in. It's pretty cut, dry, and simple for most people. Please don't leave any trash behind that you may have taken with you on your journey. No Cliff Bar wrappers, no water bottles. Pick it all up and bring it back out of the woods with you. If anything, you should bring a small trash bag with you, so if you do see any sort of trash on the trail or in the woods, you can be a good individual, pick up that trash, take it home with you, and dispose of it responsibly. All right, that's the code of the woods. Now we're going to talk about the terrain that mushrooms like to grow on. I've already given you my checklist, but let's go over a few points just to make sure to really drill it into your head. California is very diverse, and so are chanterelle spots and where they like to hang out. California has microclimates, so you might find chanterelles in one part of the woods, but you go 2 miles away and there's none to be found. If you're near the coast, I recommend you check out the coastal ranges. The dense fog in these areas are chanterelles' favorite hangout spots. But don't discount river valleys, much like the one I'm in right here. Those are also really good for chanterelles near rivers, On sloped hills though, make sure it's not saturated ground. I would highly encourage you to join a mushroom group around your area, be it on Facebook or however else you might be able to get into a mushroom group, because your specific area produces chanterelles different than my specific area, unless of course you live in Fort Bragg, California on the Mendocino coast. Okay, now that you've got some destinations down, we're going to talk a little bit about gear. This is the Foragers Tool Kit. Before you head out, let's make sure you're properly equipped with first aid, safety equipment, and mushroom harvesting items. Now, it doesn't take a lot to harvest mushrooms. You very much can. Make sure you go to a legal place like Jackson Demonstration when you have your permit. Pick your mushroom and leave. But there's a couple of other things that might be useful to have on you, and a good idea if you'd like to stay safe. First off, a good foraging basket, one made of wicker or a mesh bag. There are two reasons for this. One being it's a lot easier to carry around your mushrooms in a bag rather than your arms all day long. And two, that wicker and mesh let the mushroom distribute its spores as you hike along. As you're walking through the woods picking your mushrooms, spores will be dropping from that bag, hopefully creating some new mycelium to pop up some more mushrooms around that area. Let's talk about a good quality knife. Now, it can be any knife, just make sure that it's sharp. You can get a good mushroom harvesting knife off Amazon, and I do suggest this. This is a curved bladed knife. On the opposite end of the knife, there's boar hair bristles. These are used to clean your mushrooms as you go picking. And please, don't underestimate the value of a good map or GPS on your phone. Personally, I use OnX Hunt. I use this app all the time. I love this app because it gives you property lines as well as marks the locations of the mushrooms that you found before in the past. A bonus tip for you. If you've seen mushrooms like chanterelles pop up at a certain location, next year around that certain time, those chanterelles are likely to pop up in that same area. So you'll want to mark them on your GPS so you can revisit that area year after year. Now, using GPS on your phone is all fine and dandy, but let me give you some warnings. If you're out in the woods using, say, OnX Hunt or any other app, and your phone dies or you can't get connectivity to a satellite, you can be in some deep trouble. I do recommend bringing an actual map of the area that you're foraging in with you, along with a compass, and know how to use them. In case you ever get lost, you can find your way out of the woods. Also, use the buddy system, especially if you're a new forager. If you're going out into the woods and you're looking for mushrooms to eat as a new forager, again, I highly recommend you bringing a buddy out that knows a lot more than you about foraging for mushrooms and will not put you in harm's way when you're going to consume them. One more thing, bring something on you like a whistle, preferably a high decibel whistle. If you ever get lost and there's a search party looking for you on the ground, a whistle can be your best friend. This will let them know from a long distance away exactly where you are. Please be safe in the woods. Don't go wandering off somewhere you don't know about with a phone that's about to die and no idea on how to get out of those woods if it does. All right, we've talked about some safety and we've talked about the Foragers Tool Kit. Next, we're going to talk about what to do with your mushrooms, and this is a pretty exciting part. Wow, I actually think I see a mushroom right there on that log. It's either lion's mane or oyster mushrooms. I can't tell from here, but we're definitely going to go check it out after the video. All right, so you've been mushroom hunting. You've got your chanterelles. What to do next? This is from forest to kitchen. First off, getting your mushrooms back to your house and cleaning them is one of the more tedious things that you'll do. And I suggest as you're picking chanterelle mushrooms, or really any mushroom, you're going to want to field clean them while you're picking them. This will make your chore to clean your mushrooms once you get home that much easier. Once you pick the mushroom, if you're to pull it out or if you're to cut it, let's start with pulling it out. If you're to pull out the mushroom, and by the way, that's a whole nother debate. If you're to pull out the mushroom and you cut off the bottom, cleaning all the dirt off of it, and then you put it in your bag, great. Well, I highly encourage you to do that because, again, when you get home, it'll make it a lot easier to clean those mushrooms. Once you do get those mushrooms home, you're going to want to take that boar's hair bristle we were talking about on the back of that knife and brush off that mushroom. If you feel so inclined, you can even run it under some water if you're going to immediately cook them. For storage, if it's just a couple days, you can take your chanterelle mushrooms, put them in a paper bag, and throw them in the fridge. The reason I don't say to do this with every mushroom is because every mushroom is inherently different. And I'm not sure what you brought home, like black trumpets or king boletes or candy caps. They're all a little different and you have to treat them a little differently. But as far as chanterelles go, you could throw them in a paper bag and you could throw them in your fridge for a couple days and you'll be fine. If it's for a longer period of time, I would recommend drying out the chanterelles, and you could even freeze them. Or you could dry them out and put them in a mason jar with a little oxygen eater pack. I did this with my black trumpets 2 years ago, and I still have 4 mason jars full of black trumpets that are ready to eat today. Nobody else has black trumpets around me, and I have 4 dried quart jars of them. I'm really thankful I learned how to dehydrate them and put them in mason jars. But if you're impatient, a lot of the times, like I am with chanterelles, you want to get them home and cook them up right away. And stay tuned, because in the next part we're going to talk about a couple of recipes that you can use while preparing your chanterelles for consumption. All right, let's talk about chanterelle culinary creations. Now first, if you want something simple and you want to get the full flavor of the chanterelle, you could pan saute the chanterelle. A little bit of butter, a little bit of salt, and your chanterelles. Just saute them up and wait until they're soft but not mush. You don't want to overkick your chanterelle to where it's mush or it's the size of a pea. That's never good. If you're feeling fancy, you can try a chanterelle risotto. Also very good. If you want a good recipe to a chanterelle risotto, there's one in my ebook that I just finished writing in the description below. Thank you guys so much for joining me in identifying chanterelles on the California coast. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. If you'd like to get more in-depth information about chanterelles, you can read my ebook. Happy foraging, tight lines, peace.